My name is Ellen Parker. I'm 47 years old, and I work as a patient care coordinator at a regional hospital in Ohio. I've spent most of my life keeping things steady, my job, my family, my savings. I'm not dramatic. I don't ask for much, which is why what my father said to me that afternoon still doesn't feel real. I was sitting in my parents' living room on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The autumn light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the worn carpet. My mother had made coffee. My siblings, Bradley and Veronica, sat on the couch across from me. Dad stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back like he was about to deliver a business presentation. "Ellen," he said calmly, "we used your savings on someone more worthy." The words hung in the air. I waited for him to smile, to laugh, to say he was joking. Nothing came. Just silence and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My chest tightened. I looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Then Grandpa, who'd been sitting quietly in his chair by the window, slowly lifted his head. Grandpa's voice was soft but clear. "What money are we talking about, son?" Dad turned, his expression shifting to mild annoyance. "Dad, this is a family matter. Ellen and I can discuss." "What money?" Grandpa repeated, his tone unchanged but somehow heavier. Dad laughed, short, forced. "The college fund we set aside years ago. Ellen doesn't need it anymore. She's established. Bradley's starting his business and he—" "So you took money that belonged to Ellen," Grandpa said slowly, "and gave it to Bradley." Dad's jaw tightened. "It's more complicated than that." I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing. Bradley shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Veronica examined her nails. Mom poured more coffee she didn't drink. "Repeat what you said to Ellen," Grandpa said quietly. "The exact words." Dad's face flushed. "I don't think that's—" "The exact words, please." Bradley cleared his throat. "Look, Grandpa, this really does make sense when you understand the full picture. Ellen's got a steady job, benefits, retirement. She doesn't need—" "She was saving for a house," Grandpa said. The room went silent. How did he know that? I'd only told him once months ago, during a quiet conversation on his back porch. He'd remembered. Veronica jumped in, her voice taking on that reasonable, older sister tone she always used when she wanted to end an argument. "We're not saying Ellen doesn't deserve things. We're saying that right now, Bradley's opportunity is time-sensitive. The money was just sitting there, and—" "Just sitting there," Grandpa repeated softly. "Yes," Veronica continued, gaining confidence. "And Ellen's always been understanding. She's practical. She knows family helps family and—" Grandpa raised his hand. Not dramatically. Just lifted it slightly from the armrest of his chair. Everyone stopped talking instantly. The gesture was small, but the authority behind it was absolute. "Did Ellen agree to this?" Grandpa asked, looking directly at my father. Dad's answer came too quickly. "We discussed it as a family." "That's not what I asked." "She knew we were considering options for Bradley's." "Did Ellen agree?" Grandpa repeated, his eyes never leaving Dad's face. "To have her savings used for someone else?" Dad opened his mouth, closed it, looked at me for the first time since this conversation started. I stared back, waiting. He looked away. "We made a family decision," Dad said finally. "Without the person whose money it was," Grandpa said. "She's part of the family," Mom interjected weakly. "We thought she'd understand." Grandpa leaned forward slightly. "When was this decision made?" The question seemed simple, but something in his tone made my stomach drop. Dad hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. "Recently. Last month." Grandpa nodded slowly, as if filing that information away. "Last month," he repeated. I drove home in a fog. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The September evening had turned cold, and I cranked up the heat, but I couldn't stop shaking. They'd taken my money. Money I'd saved for 15 years. Every overtime shift. Every holiday bonus. Every tax refund carefully deposited and left untouched. I'd been so proud of that account, watching it grow slowly but steadily. I'd finally been close to a down payment on a small house. Something mine. and they'd given it to Bradley. For a business. His third business. The first two had failed within 18 months. The streetlights blurred as I blinked back tears. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a long time, engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. Someone more worthy, Dad had said. I wasn't worthy. Not of my own money. Not of being asked. Not of being told. My phone buzzed. A text from Veronica, don't be dramatic. It's family. I opened my banking app. I scrolled through transaction history with trembling fingers. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I changed the date range. 6 months back. A year. 2 years. There. Small withdrawals. 500 here. 800 there. Never enough to trigger an alert on my phone. Never round numbers that might catch my eye on a statement. They were scattered across months, carefully spaced. My chest tightened. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't a desperate last-minute decision. This was planned. Methodical. I kept scrolling. The withdrawals went back 3 years. 3 years of my father slowly draining the account he'd helped me open when I was 22, the account I'd foolishly left his name on because he'd said it would be easier for family emergencies. I'd trusted him. I'd never even checked. The total made me physically ill. Over $47,000. Gone. Transferred to an account listed only as Parker Family Holdings. Then I saw it. One of the transfers had a note attached in the memo line. Temporary family use. Temporary family use. No date. No explanation. No promise of return. Just 2 words that made my blood run cold because of what they implied. They'd planned to take it back before I noticed. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, staring at those words until they blurred. How long had they planned this? How many family dinners had I attended while they smiled at me, knowing what they were doing? Bradley's new business opportunity suddenly made sense. The casual mentions over the past year of his big plans and how he was finally ready to do something serious. The way Dad had kept changing the subject whenever I asked Bradley details about his funding. They'd funded it. With my money. While telling me nothing. My hands shook as I scrolled to Grandpa's number. It rang 3 times. Ellen, he answered. His voice sounded tired. You knew, I said. At the house. You already knew. There was a long pause. Not everything. But enough to suspect. Grandpa sighed, and I heard him settling into his chair, the old leather one in his study that creaked in a specific way. Your father did something similar about 10 years ago. Not to you. To your Aunt Judith. I'd never heard this story. Aunt Judith had moved to Arizona years ago and rarely visited. She had money set aside for her daughter's medical expenses. Grandpa continued quietly. Your father convinced her to let him invest it. Said he had a guaranteed opportunity. The money disappeared into a business venture that never materialized. Judith had to take loans to cover the medical bills. Why didn't anyone tell me? My voice cracked. Because Judith didn't want to tear the family apart. She blamed herself for trusting him. I should have stepped in then. He paused. I thought he'd learned. I thought I was protecting everyone by staying quiet. I was wrong. What do I do? I whispered. Don't confront anyone yet, Grandpa said firmly. Give me 2 days. Can you do that? I didn't understand why, but I trusted him. Yes. My father called the next morning. I stared at his name on my screen for 3 rings before answering. Ellen, honey, I wanted to check in. His voice was warm, friendly, like we just had a pleasant afternoon together. I think maybe yesterday got a little tense. You know how family conversations can be. I said nothing. The thing is, he continued, you took some things the wrong way. We weren't saying you aren't important. We were saying Bradley needed help right now, and your situation is stable. You understand that, right? You took my money without asking, I said flatly. Well, technically, it's a joint account, so. You took my money without telling me. He sighed. The patient sigh of a parent dealing with an unreasonable child. Ellen, you're focusing on the wrong thing. The family helped your brother. That's what families do. You've always been so good at understanding these things. Don't change now. My hand tightened on the phone. Is that all? Just one more thing. His tone shifted, becoming more serious. Let's not involve your grandfather in this anymore. He's elderly. He gets confused. This is between us. Grandpa appeared at my apartment the next evening holding a manila envelope. His face was drawn but determined. I need you to hold on to this, he said, pressing it into my hands. Don't open it unless I tell you to. What is it? Insurance, he said simply. You won't need it yet. But you will need it. I turned the envelope over. It was sealed with tape, unmarked except for my name written in Grandpa's careful handwriting. What's happening? I asked. Truth, Grandpa said. But slowly. Your father is going to try to control the narrative. Let him. For now. He left without explaining further. I set the envelope on my kitchen counter and stared at it for an hour. That night, I woke to my phone buzzing at 2 a.m. A text from Veronica. Dad's on the phone with someone. He's yelling about accounts and Grandpa. What did you do? I didn't respond. I pulled my blanket tighter and listened to the silence of my apartment, wondering what pieces were moving in the dark. The next family gathering was the following Saturday. Mom's birthday dinner. I almost didn't go, but Grandpa had specifically asked me to attend. Dad was in fine form. Jovial. Confident. He told stories about his younger days, about smart financial decisions he'd made, about how he'd always looked out for the family's interests. I noticed how practiced it all sounded. How smooth. He was building a narrative, painting himself as the wise patriarch who made tough calls for everyone's benefit. Bradley laughed at all the right moments. Veronica nodded approvingly. Mom smiled vaguely, her eyes distant. Then, during a pause in Dad's story about refinancing the house in 1998, Grandpa spoke. Speaking of family finances, he said mildly, cutting into his chicken, can you explain the withdrawals from Ellen's account? Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Dad, we've discussed this. Humor me, Grandpa said. Out loud. For everyone. Dad set down his fork carefully. Ellen had savings sitting in an account earning minimal interest. Bradley had an opportunity that needed immediate capital. We made a family decision to reallocate resources temporarily. When in June? Grandpa asked. What? You said last month. September. But the largest withdrawal was in June, which is 3 months ago, not last month. Dad's eyes narrowed. I meant recently. The decision process happened. The withdrawals started 3 years ago, Grandpa said calmly. Small amounts. Regular intervals. When did the family discuss that decision? The table went silent. Bradley looked at Dad. Veronica looked at Bradley. Mom stood abruptly and started clearing plates that still had food on them. Dad's jaw worked. Financial decisions are complex. The timing of individual transactions doesn't. Who was more worthy? Grandpa interrupted, his voice still quiet but sharp as a blade. You used that word. Someone more worthy than Ellen. Who? I didn't mean, Dad started. Who? Grandpa repeated. Dad's face flushed. He pushed back from the table slightly, defensive. Fine. You want details? Bradley is starting a business that could support this entire family for generations. He's young. He has potential. Ellen is in her late 40s with a stable job and no dependents. The money could sit in her account doing nothing, or it could build something real. That's not favoritism. That's strategy. The words landed like stones. I felt them physically, each one a small impact in my chest. Bradley needed it more, Dad continued, his voice rising. He's trying to build a future. Ellen is, he stopped himself, but the word hung there anyway. Settled. Established. Finished. Unworthy. The room was completely silent. Even Mom had frozen by the sink, a plate in her hands. Bradley stared at his lap. Veronica's mouth had formed a small O of shock. Grandpa looked at me. Ellen, open the envelope. My hands shook as I retrieved the envelope from my purse. Everyone watched as I carefully peeled back the tape and pulled out the contents. It was a legal document. Multiple pages, dense with text and signatures. I scanned the first page, trying to understand. It was a trust document, dated 4 years ago. My name appeared throughout, along with Grandpa's. There were clauses about educational funds, about protected accounts, about distributions and oversight. I looked up at Grandpa confused. "Read Section 7, he said quietly. I flipped pages until I found it. Section 7 detailed restrictions on account access. It specifically limited my father's authority to withdraw or transfer funds from any account bearing my name without written consent. It was dated 3 months before the first withdrawal appeared in my transaction history. "I knew your father had a pattern," Grandpa said, his eyes on Dad. "I've known for years, so I took steps to protect you. That trust agreement removed his authority to touch your money. Every withdrawal he made after that date was unauthorized." Dad's face drained of color. "You had no right." "I had every right," Grandpa said, his voice hardening. "I needed proof." Grandpa leaned back in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him, but somehow stronger too. "I've watched you for years, doing this to people who trust you. Judith, your cousin Patrick, that business partner in '09. You always had excuses. You always made it sound reasonable. And I always hoped you'd stop." He shook his head slowly. "But you didn't stop. So 3 years ago, I started documenting. I limited your access to Ellen's account through legal channels you never bothered to check. You kept taking money, thinking the joint account clause protected you. It didn't. Not after I intervened." Dad's hands were flat on the table, knuckles white. "You set me up." "No," Grandpa said calmly. "I gave you the chance to do the right thing. You took the money anyway. You chose that." He pulled a card from his pocket and slid it across the table toward me. "That's the contact information for the accountant I've hired. They'll be conducting a full audit of all family accounts where your father had access, starting tomorrow." The card lay on the table between us like a small bomb. The accountant's name was Theodore Brennan. He called me Monday afternoon while I was at work. I took the call in the break room, my heart hammering. "Miss Parker, I've begun reviewing the documentation your grandfather provided. I need to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. There are some things you should see before the formal audit report is completed." His tone was professional but carried an undertone that made my stomach clench. "How bad is it?" There was a pause. "Let's discuss this in person. Are you available tomorrow evening?" "Yes." "Good. I'll email you the address." After I hung up, I sat in the break room for 20 minutes, staring at my phone. Other staff came and went, but no one spoke to me. I must have looked unapproachable. That evening, my father called 4 times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from casual to frustrated to barely controlled anger. "We need to talk before this gets out of hand." Too late, I thought. It was already out of hand. It had been out of hand for 3 years. Dad showed up at my apartment Wednesday evening. I watched through the peephole as he knocked, waited, knocked again. "Ellen, I know you're home. Please. We need to talk." I didn't open the door. "I'm sorry," he said through the wood. "I know I should have asked. I know I should have told you. But Bradley's business, it's going to work this time. You'll get everything back. With interest." I stayed silent. "Please," he said, his voice dropping. "Don't let this audit happen. You know what they'll find. They'll twist everything. Make me look like..." He stopped. "It'll destroy this family. Is that what you want?" I leaned my forehead against the door. Part of me wanted to open it. Wanted to believe him. Wanted things to go back to how they were before I knew. But they'd never really been that way. I'd just been blind. "Ellen," Dad said quietly. "Call off the audit. For Mom. For the family. Please." I walked away from the door. He knocked twice more, then left. I never said a word. Theodore Brennan's office was small but tidy, filled with filing cabinets and the smell of old paper. He was in his 60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair. He opened a folder on his desk. "I'm going to be direct with you, Miss Parker. Your father accessed multiple accounts over the past 5 years. Yours was not the only one." He showed me spreadsheets, transaction records, highlighted patterns, my Aunt Judith's account, My cousin Kyle's college fund. Even small amounts from Grandpa's own accounts, transfers my father had labeled as household expenses, but that had gone into Bradley's business ventures. The total across all accounts is approximately $78,000, Brennan said. Your account represents the largest portion, $47,000, but he's been pulling from multiple sources, carefully staying below amounts that would trigger automatic reviews. I stared at the numbers. Why? Brennan looked at me with something like pity. Because he could. Because people trusted him. Because he convinced himself it was temporary. Will everyone find out? I asked. Yes, Brennan said simply. That's what an audit means. Grandpa called a family meeting the following Saturday. Not just our immediate family. Aunt Judith drove in from Arizona. Cousin Kyle came down from Cleveland. Uncle Raymond, who I hadn't seen in years, arrived looking grim. Grandpa had told them. All of them. We gathered in his living room, the same room where he used to host Christmas dinners and birthday parties. Now it felt like a courtroom. Grandpa sat in his usual chair, the audit report on his lap. Dad sat on the couch, Mom beside him looking small and frightened. Bradley and Veronica stood near the doorway, unsure where to position themselves. I'm going to read you some numbers, Grandpa said. His voice was steady. Come. Judith, $9,800. Kyle, $14,200. Ellen, $47,300. Various other accounts, $6,700. He looked up. Dates, documentation, and account information are all here. No emotions. No interpretations. Just facts. The room was silent. If anyone wants to review this documentation, Grandpa continued, it's available. If anyone wants to dispute these numbers, speak now. No one spoke. Grandpa's eyes moved to me. Ellen, come here, please. I stood on shaking legs and walked to Grandpa's chair. He handed me a document folder. You're now the overseer of the repayment process. These documents give you authority to review all accounts your father accessed and to establish payment terms. What? I couldn't process what he was saying. You were taken advantage of the most, Grandpa said. You deserve to see this through. I'm putting you in charge, temporarily but officially, of making sure everyone gets back what they're owed. I looked at the folder. Inside were authorization forms, signed by Grandpa and witnessed by Theodore Brennan. Legitimate. Legal. I looked at my father. His face was gray. This is about control, Dad said hoarsely. You're punishing me. No, Grandpa said. This is about accountability. Ellen will ensure repayment happens fairly and completely. That's all. I realized then what Grandpa had done. He hadn't just removed Dad's authority. He'd given it to me. Not permanently. Not vindicatively. Just long enough to make sure things were made right. Bradley and Veronica exchanged glances. They didn't know who to defend anymore. Their solid ground had turned to sand. I handled it like I handled my job at the hospital, with calm professionalism. I set up a spreadsheet. I established a repayment timeline based on Dad's income and assets. I didn't add penalties. I didn't make demands. I simply required what had been taken to be returned. Bradley had to return the money he'd already spent from the family investment in his business. He had to close the business. He screamed at me over the phone, called me vindictive and heartless. I documented the call and continued with the plan. Dad tried to negotiate, tried to ask for extensions, tried to make me feel guilty. I listened politely and stuck to the payment schedule. You're destroying me, he said during one meeting at Brennan's office. No, I said quietly. I'm making you return what you took. That's different. Within 2 months, Dad had lost his informal role as family financial advisor. No one asked his opinion anymore. No one trusted him with account information. When someone needed money advice, they called me or Grandpa. Not him. He'd built an identity around being the patriarch who knew best, who handled things, who made the tough calls. That identity crumbled. Not because I attacked it, but because the truth didn't support it. By December, my account had been fully restored. Dad had liquidated some investments, taken a loan against his house, and set up automatic payments. Every dollar returned. No shortcuts. No favors. Brennan handled the mechanics, but I reviewed everything. When the final payment cleared, I received a notification on my phone. I was at work, doing paperwork in my cubicle. The number appeared, $47,300, deposit, Parker Family Holdings. I sat there for a long time, staring at it. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, powerful. Instead, I just felt tired. That evening, Dad called. Not to apologize, to tell me what I'd cost him. I had to take out a loan, he said, his voice bitter. At my age, your mother and I can't retire now for at least 5 more years. Bradley's business is gone. Veronica won't speak to me because I can't help with her daughter's tuition. You got your money back. Was it worth it? I thought about that. Yes, I said finally. It was. Because you won, he said coldly. No, I said. Because it was mine. He hung up. We didn't speak again for months. In January, Dad made one final attempt. He showed up at Grandpa's house while I was visiting. I heard his car in the driveway and tensed, but Grandpa gestured for me to stay seated. Dad came in without knocking, something he'd always done, as if it were still his childhood home. He stopped when he saw me. This needs to end, he said, looking between us. Ellen, you made your point. But how can you do this to your own father? How can you sit there and watch me lose everything? I didn't take anything from you, I said quietly. I took back what was mine. You destroyed my reputation. Bradley's business. My standing in this family. No, I said standing. You did that. When you took money that wasn't yours. When you lied about it. When you called me unworthy. His face flushed. I didn't mean. Yes, I interrupted. You did. I walked past him toward the door, then stopped. You want to know the difference between us? When I needed money, I earned it and saved it. When you needed money, you took mine. I left him standing there. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. Grandpa came to my apartment a week later with a tin of his wife's old sugar cookies. The recipe had been passed down, and he still made them every Christmas season. We sat at my small kitchen table, eating cookies and drinking coffee. I should have done something sooner, he said quietly. After Judith. After Patrick. I knew what he was. But he's my son, and I kept hoping. He shook his head. I waited too long. I'm sorry you were the one who paid for that. You protected me, I said. That trust document. The audit. You made it possible for me to get everything back. You made it possible, he corrected. You stayed steady. You didn't scream or break things or try to hurt him. You just stood firm and let the truth be what it was. That takes more strength than people understand. He reached across and patted my hand. His skin was thin and spotted with age, but his grip was still strong. You were always worthy, Ellen. Not because of what you saved or what you earned. Just because you're you. I'm sorry your father couldn't see that. My throat tightened. Thank you. It's March now. Spring is starting to show itself in Ohio, tentative green things pushing through the cold ground. I drive past houses I used to consider out of reach and realize I can afford one now. My account is restored. My credit is solid. I could put down a payment tomorrow. But I'm not rushing. I'm taking my time, looking at neighborhoods, thinking about what I really want. Not what I was supposed to want. Not what Dad thought was practical, or what Bradley needed to prove he deserved. What I want. Someone more worthy. That phrase used to cut me. Now it just seems sad. Dad spent years believing worth was something you proved through success or potential or being the loudest voice. He never understood that worth isn't comparative. It's inherent. I didn't win by destroying him. I won by refusing to disappear. By standing still while the truth caught up. By letting him face what he'd done without softening it or excusing it or making it smaller than it was. He lost control. I kept my dignity. And in the end, that was the real victory, not in taking anything from him, but in simply taking back what had always been mine.